Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, I don't have as much time as I wanted to for this. My wife and I wants to get something for dinner. So I am going to try to do this in 10 minutes, and I'm going to do it justice in 10 minutes. Because I have somewhat of an idea in my head what I want to say. At the very least, I know what we talked about earlier. I had a conversation earlier about Sanders. And let me say it this way. We, as the way I see it, the way I look at the political landscape, at least from my dispatchers from the left, you have some people who were firm supporters of Sanders, and whatever people want to think, he jarred them out of complacency to some degree. And in being jarred out of complacency to some degree, he was cheated while their attention span was directly on the thing of the cheating itself. Some of these people were cowed into voting for Hillary Clinton for one degree. But in some cases, they hoisted Bernie Sanders' body, the one Mr. Bernie Sanders, they hoisted his body on the rafters of the DNC, and they looked at all of the progressives in the stadium and they said, kneel before her. We've beaten your champion. Look at his body hoisted up. And they paraded Bernie Sanders around the DNC convention hall like he was a captured prey from ancient Rome in a cage where they threw food and eggs at him. Nevertheless, their candidate lost reality shows. And ultimately, the ideas that Sanders had been pushing out remained. Their candidate faded away with periodic pop-ins where she's writing a book trying to explain to people, what happened? What happened? How did I lose to reality shows? My perspective that is everybody else's fault except for mine. And that goddamn Bernie Sanders and that James Comey, and it was raining that day, and I had gum in my hair, so it kind of made me a little blue, and all of these other things, as opposed to I just failed and lost. That said, there is a contingent of the left that even after they said we've broken your leader, kneel, and that contingent said no. And there seems to be this odd and interesting divide between those camps, because that divide is somewhat persistent. In an interesting, odd way, the independent senator from Vermont, who ran fundamentally as an independent for all this time, ran as a Democrat, and his caucus with the Democratic Party. And I think Sanders, from a pragmatic point of view in his head, looks at this and says, how do I get things done? And being a senator inside Washington, I suppose he gets those things done through the lens of the political landscape. I don't look at politics in that way. I look at this as somewhat of a system, and I say there's a fundamental problem in the way that we've arranged ourselves. A party has cowed the demographic and the population. Shouldn't be that way. This idea that the party itself has a workable point of view and is able to inflict that point of view on the population, on the masses, because they're so terrified of the other party. It shouldn't work that way. You've allowed your dog to curb you. It needs to be the other way around. That party needs to be terrified that it would lose, or at the very least face existential death at being losses to Republicans over and over and over again until it either dies or changes. I don't take this disposition lightly. And I say that because the model itself is purely based on this thing of you have nowhere else to go. When you look at the public's demographic, at what the public wants, the public is in line more so with Sanders than it is the other party. The party is to the far right of Sanders. We had one of those arguments of who represents the left, and I kind of made this point. There's a fundamental difference between Sanders and Chuck Schumer. I would make this case that Sanders is a classic Democrat, whatever he wants to call himself, as a democratic socialist. But he's working through that lens of you have nowhere else to go. Here's the thing. I think lefties are flirting with this idea of maybe somebody else, but they don't necessarily think anybody else will win. I think you have a lot of people who are sick and fed up with the Democratic Party. You have, 70% of people who wanted a different party from standpoint of millennials. Sanders won millennials in spades. But in his mind, he needs to work within the party, meaning there are only two parties. There's only two solutions. And because there are only two solutions, you have nowhere else to go. What happens? I think lefties are putting their eggs in a Sanders basket. I think they assume that he starts off as a front runner. And because he starts off as a front runner, he has a great chance of winning. And that him winning will be able to choose the head of the DNC and fundamentally transform the party itself. That's a moment in the sun scenario. That's a full moment in the sun. That's people ripping their shirts and ripping their clothing off and running into the beach and just swimming away in the sun and the warm breeze. Yeah, that's a nice scenario. But what if it doesn't happen that way? Two scenarios. What if Sanders just lose? Meaning the dynamic is somewhat slightly different than what the dynamic was prior. In which case, he can't necessarily galvanize the public around him in the same way he did before. I don't necessarily think that will be true. But assuming that for the moment, maybe assuming it is. What happens? Maybe he's lost some of the support at the bottom that he had prior. Who knows? And the other scenario, what if he's cheated? Now, I say all the eggs in Sanders' basket because I think if Sanders loses, all the momentum goes out the window. At that point, the progressive base flutters away. There's nothing else there. Our revolution is nice, but I don't necessarily think our revolution has the gravitas of Sanders. I guess I'm saying all of the eggs seems to be in that one basket. Left got his ass handed to it in Los Angeles. They sent back Dianne Feinstein, Nancy Pelosi, and somebody else. I think it was Kamala Harris. What happens if he loses? And that's even assuming he runs. What if he doesn't even run? Trump presented an opportunity. Honestly, he did. And in presenting that opportunity, he put the worst face of the capitalistic system and hung it on a husk of a person. And they vilified it, not through the problems associated with the model, because maybe they don't see any issue with the model. If you're Nancy Pelosi with $100 million in a bank, is she really going to feel your pain? And ultimately, they're talking about a better deal when ultimately the people who will put that better deal in, they've been putting their thumb on the scale to keep them out of office. In some cases, even telling them to get out of the race. Sanders is pushing people to the Democrats because I think he thinks he's going to run. What if he loses? And I don't ask this question for the people who are like, fuck Sanders. I'm asking this question more so for the people who haven't. And I'm one of those people who haven't said fuck Sanders. I think he was put in a difficult situation. I wish he would have responded differently to some of that stuff. But if he runs again, he has my vote. Full-throated. Easy. Not even a hard choice. But for people like that, I mean, you kind of need to deal with that. I mean, that shit's real, or at the very least a real potential. I think some of us on the left have this kumbaya moment that Sanders is going to run again and everything is going to be perfect. And like Bob Ramirez says, Sanders Claus is going to fix everything. I don't think it works that way. I do think it works from the standpoint of that's possible. But what if he loses? What if they cheat him again? If they cheat him again, does he endorse Kamala Harris? Oh God, I would have a fucking stroke on camera. Or does he say, hey, I'm done with this, and he does something else? I don't know, but I think 2020 is going to be fascinating. More so if Sanders runs. If Sanders does not run, what does that mean for the people on the left? I don't know an answer to this question, which is why I'm posing the question itself. I honestly think if Sanders doesn't run, or if Sanders loses, all of the air that was in the left gets deflated. The icon, the thing, or the person that's emblematic of this kind of quote-unquote movement, per se, gets a knife put in him. What happens? What happens? Does all the stuff go along with him, or does the movement keep going? And does the movement keep going? How does it keep going? Like, I'm fascinated by these questions, because I do feel like there is, we are in the middle of something. I don't know what that something is, and it does seem to be a change of consciousness that's taking place within the country itself, even if they don't fully understand what that change of consciousness is. They are becoming more aware of class. They don't have a choice. They've been beat into them. I know there are two wings of the same party as it stands now, but if Bernie wins and becomes head of the party, that would change unless they kill him. I don't think they're going to kill him, Trudy. I don't think that way. Well, see, Trudy, right there, that even needs to be challenged to some degree. What do you think he's going to do? I think he would put somebody who's more in line with him ahead of the DNC, maybe Jeff Weaver. If it was up to me, I would purge the DNC, but that's me. I'm an asshole, and to me, this is about winning. And if I want to get my agenda through, I don't want those, the Blairites biting me in the ass. In this case, the Clintonites trying to put a knife in me. I would look at this as this is about a sea change, and this is about some degree of a coup in regards to what it takes to be a Democrat. And only then will you get those people back from a standpoint of trust. That's my thought. He would call on us for backup. Trudy. People change. That doesn't mean we don't see their gifts from the past. That's true. I wish for him to reap what he grew. I know he can do better. He really hurt people. I mean, he didn't hurt you. It just... Come on. Buck up. He didn't hurt you. I mean, you had certain expectations of him, and those expectations weren't realized. You can call that hurt, but is that Sanders' fault or is it your fault? I'm not blaming. I'm just saying hurt is a little strong. Hurt is a little strong. I don't want to do one of these things of trying to minimize your pain or something to that effect. Hurt is a little strong. Maybe I'm an asshole. Maybe I'm an asshole. Oh, Lord, not me. Fair enough. Fair enough. Most people vote straight ticket. If Bernie wins, he could change the whole thing. And that's the interesting part, right? So I think of this from the standpoint of FDR. So FDR gets in. FDR passes certain legislation that moves the country to the left. He has to fight other Democrats in order to make it work. Literally has to fight other Democrats. That whole court packing stuff, to some degree, was because he was having trouble with the Supreme Court striking the stuff down. And so he came with the idea, nothing says the president can't add more people to the Supreme Court. And at which point the country said, no! They howled. He relented on that. But do you see the difference between somebody who means it and somebody who doesn't? Look at the Scottish National Party. At every moment, every opportunity they get, they're screaming about, we want to get out of the UK. Or we want to stay in the EU. It doesn't. You give any of them a mic, and the first thing they're going to talk about is staying in the EU or getting out of the UK. They mean it. They're going to use every procedural motion. They're going to use any and everything at their disposal to get what they want because they actually mean it. They believe it. Full stop. I want Democrats to act like Republicans, but for things that are fucking awesome. For things like healthcare, things like education. I want them to strip the filibuster away if they get the chance to be in power. I want them to be remorseless for anti-war, for the poor, for the indigent, for the regular people who are in the country itself. That's what I want them to be. I want them to be Republicans, but in a flip polarity way. And honestly, from the same thing with Sanders. Same thing with Sanders. Be brutal. You're doing God's work. Let's see. All right, I gotta go. 14 minutes. That's not too bad. All right, guys. I wish this conversation would be longer. I may have to do this one again just to have a longer conversation. But if you guys enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe. Of course, you can always support through Patreon. And put your comments down below. I'm curious on what people think about this. What happens to the left if Sanders doesn't run? What happens to the left if Sanders loses? What happens to the left if Sanders cheated? What happens? What happens? Does it all go to pot? Does it just undermine and completely deflate if something like that takes place? Now, yeah, what happens? Now, by the same token, again, if Sanders wins, but I guess my feeling is this is such a high-stake bet that everything from the left is said, everything on Sanders. That's what it feels like. And that at any moment, the bookie is just going to say, thank you for your cash. Could be wrong. I hope I'm wrong. Personally, emotionally, I have this thing of feeling this is an opportunity for change that we've never had before. Just the opportunity. So there's this element of me that's this child running in the sun, playing with the daisies, hoping that Bernie Sanders actually does it, that he wins. But that's a child running in the sun, a grown-ass man. And I look at this from the standpoint of, it's possible. I can't discount it. But Jesus Christ, what happens if he doesn't? I'll end it here. You guys have a decent one. Let me know your thoughts. Thanks, guys.